great to have you with us. Thank you for making time for the show from wherever you might be watching across Africa and beyond. Now, this week we host Bright Simons, who is the president of M-Pedigree Network, a technology pioneer in Africa. We get your views on the issues, and we have Africa's top 10. You're watching the Africa Leadership Dialogues. I am Julie Gichuru. Bright Simons is the president of M-Pedigree Network, pioneering a system that allows consumers to instantly check whether their medicines are counterfeits or not by sending a free text message. He is the Honorary Director of Development Research at Imani and a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Councils on Data and Development. He's also a young global leader and a member of the Technology Pioneers communities, as well as a TED and a Shocker Fellow. Bright is a recipient of numerous awards and fellowships. He has consulted on innovation strategy by international organizations such as the World Bank, UNECA, USAID, and the Commonwealth, and is a member of the United Nations Task Force on Innovative Models in Healthcare. He's a Global Fellow of the Salzburg Global Seminar, where he also served on the 2011 Faculty for Healthcare, and is a member of the Advisory Board of IC Publications, one of the world's leading publishers focused on Africa and the African diaspora. He's also a member of the Microsoft for Africa Advisory Council, the Lancet Commission on Sub-Saharan Health, and the Sanofi Digital and Africa 2.0 Advisory Boards. Let's get his insights into Africa. Bright, thank you so much for making time for the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
I'm delighted to be here, Julie.
Now, you work in one of those exciting industries, technology, security as well. What is your experience in terms of growth of your business on the African continent?
We started off as a pure social enterprise with a goal to enable our farmers who produce their food using very little fertilizer, herbicides, and other chemicals to be able to take advantage of the growing preference of consumers worldwide to buy produce that have very little chemical residue, what is normally called organic produce. The challenge is that because it requires a certification, you need some logo on the product, and that logo is issued out in the West by fairly bureaucratic Western agencies. Our farmers are cut off from that trade, which could double or triple their income. So the idea was to create an alternative certification for organic produce, an alternative way to tell consumers that this produce was produced naturally, this vegetable or fruit was produced naturally, by connecting them directly to the farm through the power of technology. Unfortunately, the business model was not robust enough because the farmers themselves require support to be able to do it. So invariably, we had to essentially raise them up before they could benefit from the technology.
So for instance, extension officers are required on the ground to make those connections.
Extension officers are required on the ground to make those connections. But if you introduce a new technology, then you have to train the extension officers in order for them to train the farmers. And it wasn't clear who the client was in the initial phases. Ultimately, the client will probably be the buying side of the equation, which will mean the supermarket buyer, say the Tesco buyer or the Nakumatt buyer, whatever, But it wasn't clear that they were willing to pay to experiment for the model. And that meant that we had to pivot. That's what we call it in technology terms. Pivot means you shift the technology towards a new use case. And in our case, because our fundamental point was that trust was critical, in this case, trust that this product was grown organically, this fruit was grown organically, it's important. We could find another context where the need for trust was even more critical because lives were literally at stake. And this was the case of medicines, where around the same period that we had almost given up on the idea, there was a huge scandal in Nigeria of children dying from medicine that have been made to look like good medicine, but were in fact not good medicine.
Right.
And they were not good medicine because somebody had copied the packaging, but badly produce the content. So these children died from taking this medicine. And we shifted the use of the technology to make it possible for consumers, when they buy the medicine, using a free text message to confirm that that product is the original, not a copy, and also that it's originated from the right source.
Right.
Which means a properly certified factory. So from properly certified farms to properly certified pharmaceutical laboratories.
Right.
That has been the journey that we've been through.
Has it been successful?
It's been dramatically successful in some places and less so in other places. In Nigeria, we've grown to the extent where you can't legally sell anti-malarials in Nigeria if consumers do not have the power
To confirm.
at the point of purchase to confirm that that medicine is genuine. That's dramatic. I mean, we have attained that status ahead of a lot of the so-called developed countries of the West. Power has been put in the hands of Nigerian consumers so they can make an extremely important decision that affects their life and well-being in the pharmacy before they leave. Think of a mother buying this medicine for their child. They want to make sure they're getting the right product. In the past, they've had to rely on the goodwill of the pharmacist, the goodwill of the distributor, ultimately the goodwill of the manufacturer. Now we're allowing them to play a very critical role as the final arbiter in that chain of quality. So this is a dramatic improvement in the situation. In East Africa, we've done a lot of pilots, but transitioning to a fully functioning service which will give East African consumers the same degree of confidence has been extremely difficult because of regulatory issues in different countries.
Right. We'll come back to East Africa, and perhaps particularly when it comes to pharmaceuticals, the situation might be slightly different because the problem is not as big, as intense. But let's come back for a moment to farming. Before we go into that, let me say kudos for ensuring that you are working and making technology applicable, relevant to people on the ground. But let's go back to farming. Do you feel that there is a way that you could still leverage that platform in agriculture? Because middlemen are fleecing a lot of our farmers. It may be a challenge. Do you see the potential, especially of governments getting involved and saying, we're willing to work with you to provide the connections that are required?
So the governments have been a challenge because the general thinking has not been of innovation leading. The thinking has always been we are catching up with the West, so we need to do capacity building. We rarely think that we have solutions that perhaps outmaneuvers our constraints in a way that even the West has not got to. We don't really think from that default position, that somehow we're going to outthink this problem before the West does. So if every effort is made to try and catch up with the West, a lot of it is hand-me-downs. Innovation requires you to think beyond hand-me-downs. You solve the problem sometime before the rest of the world even know there's a problem. Therefore, I have not been encouraged as much as I should be by governments and their likelihood to support this kind of endeavor. But as I said, in Nigeria, the government has been helpful in one dimension. It could happen that they'll be helpful in other dimensions. It's funny that you raise the issue of agriculture. So let me surprise you. This problem finds itself in agriculture in almost identical formats. A lot of the herbicides, which is the chemicals used instead of using cutlass and hoes to clear weeds, the crop protection chemicals such as the pesticides, which is used to protect the crop from pests, or insects and things like that, are counterfeited.
Oh, there we go.
In Uganda, you have a huge, thriving trade of millions of dollars of fake crop protection chemicals.
And the impact on the farmer is significant. One would imagine.
Multi-level impacts on the society. First, these chemicals do not go through certification because they are fake. So they pollute groundwater, they pollute the soil, which has intergenerational effects. These chemicals leave residue on the products that are not cleared by normal washing because they are not formulated properly. So people eat fruits and they ingest these chemicals. And of course, as you pointed out, farmers who get fake seeds that they plant and find out that the yields have reduced dramatically one planting season to the next because these seeds, even though they look like normal seeds, are often grains.
you have an opportunity here to speak directly to government, and particularly because you want to see implementation of laws. You want these counterfeiters, these criminals, to be stopped. But also there's a solution here that's being provided for verification. What would you say to governments in terms of what we need to see them do to transform the situation?
Before I became a social entrepreneur, I was a social activist. And I was much more effective in holding the big stick and saying, government, you got to move, government, you got to move. Once you become an entrepreneur, it's a bit harder to do because you need to work with people to put together the systems that over time you get buy-in. So the persuasion technique has obviously changed. What has not changed is my deeply held perception that governments in Africa have lost it when it comes to confidence in our own ability to solve our own problems. They've completely lost it. They don't get up thinking which of our citizens are already doing things that can dramatically address the problems that we face and whose activities and actions we need to immediately amplify. They start off with a view that somehow the problem is not, the definition of the problem is more important than experimenting with solutions that are already gaining roots. That is the thinking. So there's a lot of workshops, there's a lot of seminars, there's a lot of World Bank, IMF, Danida, DFID, etc. An attempt to sometimes as if we're still searching for solutions all the time. Very little effort going into, here are some nice solutions. They may be small, they may be at the stage of low maturity, but so long as people on the continent are taking great steps and making strides in coming up with their own solutions, the primary duty of government should be to amplify those efforts.
Right.
But they don't seem to think that way. And when you go and you present these solutions to them, it's as if it doesn't fit into their grand narrative, then somehow you're asking too much of them. And that grand narrative is often not developed in Africa. I still spend a lot of my time on policy analysis, where I volunteer with a think tank in Ghana, which has a Pan-African focus. And I frequently trying to challenge governments in Africa to become more rigorous in the way that they assess some of these so-called grand narratives, in the way that they take for granted some of the views that have been foisted on Africa, and saying, look, we have solutions here, we have problem solvers here. Why do you treat them with disdain?
Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
As we move forward, I just want to take a moment to point out, for instance, the fact that when Sudan started, when the fighting in South Sudan was reignited, Kenyans were in various places across South Sudan, and a team of young Kenyans worked overnight to set up a platform via Juliana Rotich and Ushahidi, which allowed people by SMS to identify very simply where they were, and they were picked up. And this is an example of how, if government gives confidence to the technocrats, the people out there who have the solutions, we could transform and we could have the solutions. And I'll ask you to give, still when we close, you'll still give your message from your heart to the policymakers and to the leaders. But I want to stay with the grand narrative for a moment. You've made a hugely powerful statement there. Let's pursue that. I know, Bright, that you challenge a lot of the research, a lot of the global research, the numbers on Africa, the statistics on Africa. You are one of the voices that stands up and says, well, how did you get that data? What's the foundation of that information? Tell us a little bit about that.
Every research effort begins with a hypothesis. You cannot go out into the world and start to explore without a preconceived notion of what might be out there. So the hypothesis formation is the starting point of knowledge. In Africa, we don't have enough of these hypotheses homemade. So the research is invariably skewed in directions that sometimes betrays deep ignorance of where we've come from, what we're doing, and what we intend to do. To give you an example, when you look at, for instance, the issue of gender in Africa, an issue very close to your heart, Africans have perceptions about gender that are deeply rooted in Asian tradition. If you go to my part of the world, for instance, my part of the continent, we have strong matrilineal cultures where systems were developed to prevent oppression by royal dynasties, by ensuring that succession only passed through the mother's side. Therefore, patriarchal dynasties were never allowed in my part of the country. That has a huge impact on the way democracy is shaped. By understanding that some of the patriarchal modes of thinking, some of the narrative around patriarchy, can be countered by having matrilineal succession. So it's not just merely a gender issue anymore, it's a political economy issue, at the root of which is gender thinking, or gender-sensitive thinking. Yet, so when we look at how we solve conflict issues, how we solve productivity issues and the rest, you find out that the core theories, the frameworks in which we perceive the world are often not African. And then the research is built on top of that. So you may be collecting data, but you may be collecting completely wrong data. And we've seen that every time we have done rebase in Africa, economic figures change in ways that are almost ridiculous.
Nigeria is an example.
Very good example. Ghana was another example. Economy grew by maybe 60% through rebasing. What did that show? It meant that the mechanisms for measurement were always, or had for many years been insensitive to the true nature of the economy, what people really did in the economy.
For the benefit of our viewers, explain rebasing.
So rebasing is an attempt to ensure that the national accounts are consistent. You have a business. In your business, you have an account. You know your inputs, your outputs, your costs, your revenue. But you predefine certain items and you put the numbers there all the time. So you know that, for instance, you're spending money on lighting, you're spending money on sound, you're spending money on engineering. These are predefined areas, and then you slot in figures. National accounts over time get outdated because some of the headings, the columns, and the rest of it have just changed over a period of time. Sometimes the nature of the economy has transformed. Telecommunications is playing a bigger role. Certain huge, let's say the post office. Let's say the post office was a major feature in the economy 10 years ago. It's no longer a major feature. To update those accounts, you need to use a rebasing method. That selects a new base year to compare your economic transformation and your economic changes. So it's the process of taking a new base year. Let's say your old base year was 1990, when the economy was so different. It's now 2014. Comparing your output today, using benchmarks set in 1990 just doesn't work.
Right.
So if you shift it to say 2005, the comparisons become much more consistent. Therefore, your ability to measure growth from one year to the other improves. That sense is rebased.
So how important is it for Africans, experts on the continent, to actually take control of the narrative when it comes to the financials, the GDPs of our countries? Because, currently we seem to be at the mercy of these global bodies and figures which are completely, in many cases, disconnected with the reality on the ground.
It starts off with the elites in Africa becoming a true and a proper elite. We have an elite that is completely divorced from the reality on the ground. They don't connect to their own people. They don't try to understand why their people behave the way they do. They don't take effort to understand the cultural evolution of our lives. Why do we act the way we do? There is very little observation, what is normally called participant observation, where somebody who has been in the civil service for 15 years writes an interesting treatise of how civil service behavior and culture in Kenya has shaped over the last 30 years.
The evolution.
Why,
Yes.
So very little participant observation, looking around and saying, why is that in Nigeria, more often than not, the richer people get, the more they wear African clothes. But in Kenya, the richer people get, the more they wear Western clothes. There must be some grand hypothesis in that. Why do we have so few thinkers in Africa addressing some very basic questions about the way we behave, the way we do? Why is Harare now a suburb of Johannesburg? You don't have to wait for a World Bank ethnographer to come and tell you that nowadays cities in different parts of Africa are more connected to each other than they are to their own countryside. Wow. These are important dynamics changing the way that our society actually behaves. People in Accra who are in a certain income bracket consider Lagos a more familiar terrain than they consider some parts of northern Ghana. In fact, many parts of northern Ghana. That changed the way the economy is shaping up. We don't observe properly. And then we don't build hypotheses which challenges the narrative that has been taken for granted. It's what you might call a completely discordant culture of scholarship. The culture of scholarship is just completely wrong in Africa now. It's not based on an attempt to re-examine our lives and build new hypotheses. So if you start from, okay, I want to measure African economic output, but you don't understand our gift culture. You don't understand the way that we do our traditional accounting, how we keep our money, etc., etc. You are going to design systems of measurement that will, over time, diverge from reality.
Right.
And that's just one example. If you look at our healthcare, the nature of our institutionalized healthcare just doesn't work in the way that our minds work. Our strong belief in the fusion of soul and body, etc., the fact that in Uganda, 80% of people still rely on herbal medicine, have created very low expectations of medicine generally. Because people believe that you are lucky if you get the right combination. You have to experiment. You have to try it out. There's notion that you take one pill and you get well. It's just not us. So we often likely to blame our medical condition as peculiar to us. And therefore that medicine is not acting the way that my particular chemistry works. So if the medicine fails, it's not in our habit to immediately assume it's fake medicine. It's not. So our pharmacovigilance is just different.
Yeah. We attribute it to self. And
self. Because that's how our medical culture has been shaped up. Now, if you build an institutional medical infrastructure and import wholesale how Western medicine is organized, without your own medical doctors and medical scholars trying to create new hypotheses around how we do medicine and the rest, you will get fake medicine. You get 66% of medicines in Guinea being fake.
And people will consume them. And yeah.
So you will get those realities that suggest that Africa is somehow bizarre. The reason you're getting those outputs and those results is because the continent's own foundational realities and the elements of its culture have been discarded. And without the hypothesis to start from, we've assumed and taken for granted some generic hypothesis. And then we are trying to build theories and statistics on top of those hypotheses. That is our problem.
Right. We've literally come to the end of the show, but I feel we are at the beginning of a very serious discussion. And I want to welcome you back and possibly welcome you back to sit with an audience as well and carry out this engagement, because a lot needs to be done. And if I'm hearing you right, we need to involve the academic world.
And bring the gulf between the elites and the ordinary masses of Africa.
As well. Thank you so much. Before we close, persuasion to government. What is your message to the leadership on the continent and also to the citizenry? What must we start to do to change? How should we evolve to truly ensure that we are part of the Africa Rising narrative? Please look into the camera.
Leaders, stop taking our thoughts and our lives for granted. They are not. They are complex, peculiar formations that have taken millennia, thousands of years to evolve in Africa. We are different in the way we look at things and in the way that we innovate and solve our problems. And unless you are looking at what is going on, picking up the pieces and finding out ways to create new tapestries, you are going to continue to exert your best efforts and get very, very limited results.
Thank you.
Thank
wow,
you.
Powerful.
Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
My name is Bright Simmons. I'm the president of the M-Pedigree network, and you are watching the African Leadership Dialogues.
Perhaps the most powerful lesson is that we must start investing in serious African research based on our own parameters, our environments, and our realities. Data is important. How much do we have that has actually originated from Africa? Well, let's get your views now on the issues.
This week we asked you, what are the most exciting technology opportunities in Africa? Wakulima says, e-learning, agriculture and health in that order. Githuku James Kinyanjui says, ICT field, mobile phone technology and digital systems are most exciting. Money transfer has been eased and made efficient. Many African states are rooting for cashless transactions in a bid to curb corruption.
I'm Eric, watching from Meru County. Africa is now seen as a major technology hub with unprecedented growth and prosperity. One of the most intriguing opportunities that have come up is the ICT sector. It has boosted various sectors of the African economy. For example, mobile and wireless transfer of money across different countries facilitates easier business transactions. Opportunities on power generation, like expansion of already existing power plants and tapping power from previously untapped sources like windmills and nuclear energy, is a step forward in technology. On health matters, African scientists have ideas about many of the health problems and have a major role to contribute to finding a global solution. Promising prospects exist to connect African infrastructure to the rest of the global community, especially in the northern part of the continent, with connecting it with Europe and Asia.
To join our conversation, go to our G+ page, Africa Leadership Dialogues, on Facebook, Africa Leadership Dialogues, on Twitter, @AfricaLD, and on WhatsApp, send your video comments to +254 715 816 033.
Time now for Africa's Top 10.
On Africa's Top 10 this week, we feature startups to watch out in 2014. This is according to CNN. Starting us off at number 10 is Able Wireless Company Africa. The Kenyan startup is an edge-of-network service that delivers content over a wireless network through a secure device, reducing 83% of capital and operational costs for current network providers, creating a legitimate distribution system. At number 9 is Kopo Kopo. With the Kenyan economy riding the M-Pesa wave, the key beneficiaries have been consumers using their mobile phones to make payments. Kopo Kopo aims to make merchants the next mobile payment-enabled segment of society. Coming in at number 8 is 227 in South Africa. Financial planning site and now app 227.com offers a different behavioral economic approach to managing your finances. It aims to blend behavioral science, play and technology to create new generation money management service. Slotted in at number 7 is Sleep Out, headquartered in Mauritius. Sleepout.com is an e-commerce booking website that serves as a platform connecting guests from around the world with accommodation suppliers at discounted rates in Africa, the Middle East, and the Indian Ocean Islands. Obami comes in at number 6. By applying social media technologies to a learning management system, Obami provides a powerful solution for individuals, learning institutions, and the community that form within and between them to connect, create, share, and learn. Positioned at number 5 is Empower in Ghana. Empower is an application that connects employers and the blue-collar workers with the use of a mobile phone. Empower seeks to make the labor market in Africa efficient, effective, and fair for all players, both employers and job seekers in the industry. At number 4 is Deal Day in Nigeria. Deal Day is the most popular online shopping site in Nigeria. It ranks in the top 5 online stores in Nigeria, and you can buy quality products at good deals. Taking the number 3 spot is Jumia, based initially in Nigeria and aiming to be the African Amazon. Jumia.com offers cash on delivery in various African cities, adopting the shop-in-shop concept. Paperwrite in South Africa comes in at number 2. Paperwrite turns any business with any printer and an internet connection into a print-on-demand bookstore. Paperwrite lets publishers earn license fees from legal printouts of their books, cutting out expensive distribution and printing costs. At number 1 this week is BRCK. Designed in Nairobi, Kenya, BRCK is a brick-like mobile device referred to as the Internet Backup Generator. The BRCK has a big battery so it can keep up to 20 devices connected for 8 hours and is robust enough to handle power failures, poor line speeds, and just general grumpiness. And that's Africa's Top 10 this week.
We always end the show with some words of wisdom, and our proverb this week is simple but very powerful, and it reads, "If you watch your pot, your food will not burn." Blessings to you and blessings to Africa.